Have you ever sat there and thought to yourself, I really want to play something that will hook me for at least 40 hours, have me taking on different creatures across the world, learn a new language one letter after another, discover if religion is a thing for me, wish two teenagers would end up together, and when all is said and done, just sit there on the borderline of depression as the credits roll? Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Final Fantasy X. So for all of you impatient people getting ready to comment, yes it is, well let me say it because this is my channel, so yeah, it is. It is worth playing. Go play it. Originally released in 2001, Final Fantasy X is what many, and I mean many fans of the series would call the last real Final Fantasy experience. Do I agree with that? Absolutely not. Honestly, I think that's a pretty dumb argument overall, but that's not what this video is about. In the 21 years since its original release, it has held up extremely well as far as its reputation goes. It's arguably what many fans of the series suggest as a good entry point for anyone trying to start Final Fantasy, and honestly, I have to agree. 10 is that balance of having what made the original 9 games so special to many fans, whilst being able to blend and mix in a little bit more modern design choices through both the gameplay and storytelling side of things. You don't have to be a die-hard fan to see the clear difference in terms of art and graphic directions between Final Fantasy 9 and 10, especially when you realise these games are only released 1 year apart. It basically changed enough to feel modern, but not too much to piss off the fanbase. Then again, this is Final Fantasy, so someone is always going to be pissed off and tell you how nothing after the PS1 era is even worth looking at. You see that beautiful Final Fantasy 16 trailer? You know, the game that could potentially be something incredible with all the respected people working on it? Yeah, ignore it. It'll be horrible, don't even look at it. Yoshi P, who's that? Go play Final Fantasy 7 for the 20th time. Anyways, as I have been putting out these sort of videos for other entries in the series, yes, that is a shameless plug, go check them out after this, I knew the day would come when I would need to cover Final Fantasy X, and truth be told, this is the video I was least looking forward to. We still have a lot of games to cover, such as Final Fantasy XII, 13-2, all the expansions in Final Fantasy XIV, but this one is a little bit different, and that's not because I have some wild crazy take about the game, or even because I dislike some aspects of it. In fact, it's actually the opposite. I love Final Fantasy X. It's my favourite entry in the series. It means so much to me on a personal level that I can't even put it into words, but if it makes my feelings any clearer, this game made me feel emotions nothing else had ever managed to before. It is just one of those games that stayed in my heart ever since I played it and finished it for the first time. And the craziest part of that, I've only finished it once. Only once, back in 2018, have I finished Final Fantasy X, and yet that was still enough for me to know just how strongly I felt about it. That's why this video is both so special to me, but also something I have been avoiding. The idea of having to approach this game with a non-biased and a more crucial mindset scared me of the potential impact it might have on my opinion. What if this game I consider the best in the series on a personal level isn't actually that great when looked at from a different perspective? Well, I guess if you're still here, then that means you want to find out just what ended up happening as I replayed the entirety of Final Fantasy X for this video. And to be clear, I didn't just play halfway, I didn't rush either. I wanted this to be a full experience, taking my time, enjoying the side content, interacting with everyone and learning about the world, going after trophies where I could, and all of this because I wanted a complete experience that I wouldn't forget for years to come. In case you haven't got around to playing this game yet, this video is mostly spoiler free, some subtle story elements from early hours will be shared, and you will see some occasional gameplay footage from late game, but none of it is something I would consider spoilers myself. I just wouldn't want to ruin this experience for anyone else, so you are safe. However, that said, for the very first time in these videos, there will be a spoiler section at the end. This is just to express some extra opinions that others who have played this entry can relate to, but also potentially agree or disagree with. If that is something you guys think I should be doing more moving forward for future worth playing videos, then let me know in the comments. I always feel like I have more to say at the end, but due to these videos being spoiler free, I just unfortunately can't share everything, so it is definitely a potential moving forward. As always, if you do find yourself enjoying this video, then a like is much appreciated, and do let me know what is your opinion on Final Fantasy X as a whole. Are you a lover, are you a hater, or you just don't care and you want me to hurry up, which is a very fair point. So with all of that said, let's take a look at Final Fantasy X from a 2022 perspective, 21 years after its original release, and see if it's still worth playing and dedicating your time, or if maybe you should just skip this one. Final Fantasy X has you experiencing the story through the eyes of Tidus, a young blonde athlete who's the star player of his Blitzball team, aka he's the hot guy. But before you know any of that, the opening segment showcases a cast of 7 characters sitting by a bonfire, surrounded by destroyed buildings and landscapes, accompanied by a somber track playing in the background. These few seconds build up to 2 short sentences. Listen to my story, this may be our last chance. This builds a sense of mystery. Why did that location look the way it did? Who are all of these characters? What things have they seen and experienced? And why exactly is it that this is the last chance to tell this story? All of these questions to be answered in due time, of course, but as all good stories go, we need to start at the beginning. In the city that never sleeps, Zanarkand. It's here that we start to get a good idea for Tidus the character, a smirky and cocky teenager who is fully aware of just how popular he is, talking to girls, young fans, and making his way to the stadium for a match. And let me tell you, that cutscene that follows is arguably the greatest opening cinematic of all time. Just the cutscene alone, okay? Not the build up or what follows, but there is no way you saw this and you didn't just get chills running down your... You know what? Just, here you go, watch it. You see that? Perfection. The build up, the water effects, the hair, the sudden music kicking in. The rest of the cutscene is okay, but those first few seconds, godly. What follows is what we see at the end of the cinematic with an attack on Zanarkand. Non-familiar creatures start making their way through the city, wreaking havoc. Luckily for Tidus, he bumps into Auron, a mysterious hunk of a man who wears shades even at night. Not much is known about him at this point, only that him and Tidus seem to have some sort of a connection or relationship going back. This is the first of 3 tutorial sections in Final Fantasy X. They're all fairly short, but ensure the player understands how the gameplay will work on top of setting up the story. Auron provides Tidus with a weapon and informs him that the massive creature attacking the city and spawning all the smaller enemies is what they call Sin. The tutorial section of combat begins. I will skip over the combat for now as we'll talk about it as a whole later, but the basics of turn-based combat are pretty much explained here. Tidus keeps going forward, defeating smaller enemies, until eventually both him and Auron get sucked up into a massive butthole, with Auron stating Tidus' story begins here. So goodbye Zanarkand and hello wet, cold and depressing dungeon. This entire section is another tutorial for combat, but also item use, item collecting and save points. The end of this section has Tidus getting captured by a group of strangers we can't understand, with the exception of one girl named Riku. And here we begin the third and final prologue mini section as Tidus works with Riku to explore some underwater ruins. This section teaches us some small details once again, like how leveling up will work, using special skills and trigger commands in combat. But most of all, the main thing we learn in this section is that any water physics you might have learned at any point in your life are incorrect. You can throw grenades, move at top speed, and of course breathe underwater without any sort of issues. This is even implied much earlier, considering Blitzball literally takes place in a human fish tank. These guys play an actual sport underwater like it's just another day. Anyways, the underwater task goes well, we make it back to the ship, and just when it looks like we finally found some stability and we're getting some information like how this place is called Spira and oh, I don't know, the fact that Zanarkand was apparently destroyed 1,000 years ago. The ship gets attacked, causing Tidus to fall overboard, leading him to waking up in a new location once again, meeting new characters once again, and playing Blitzball once again. But this time, it's where the game's story truly begins. Here, at Destiny Islands. It's at this point we get some actual setup for the world and the story that goes along with it. Sin, an almighty, massive creature that pops up from time to time and destroys everything or anything it wants. Getting close to Sin can also lead to being affected by its toxin, which is what most people assume happened to Tidus as he doesn't know anything about Spira. Honestly, it is easier to go along with it rather than explaining how you got sucked up into a massive butthole with an older dude wearing shades, so Tidus just goes along with it. But that's when we learn there is in fact a way to stop Sin for a period of time. A summoner must go through a pilgrimage accompanied by guardians of their choice, travelling from one temple to another collecting Aeons, which are this game's versions of summons, only to collect the final Aeon that can stop Sin and bring peace to Spira. And it's at this point we meet the true starting cast of characters, the main one of course being the summoner Yuna. A young, beautiful and innocent girl who was the first summon introduced to us in the game. Yuna is a character that can very easily come off as a simple type who just cares about everyone being happy and joyful, but due to her father being a previous high summoner, the pressure and expectations set on her are much higher than any other summoner at the beginning of their journey. Similar to Tidus' father being a Blitzball star player, he too had that reputation to live up to, but in his case he hated everything about that. As the story progresses, so many more layers to her personality and emotions get revealed, making this pilgrimage more than just collecting Aeons, but instead self-discovery through life experiences, choices, and events taking place. Then we have Wakka, a cheerful airhead who is a professional Blitzball player for a team that has never won a single game. Does that make him any less professional? Yeah, probably, but he's also one of the 3 guardians Yuna has to begin a journey. I say to begin because as the game goes on, she may pick up a few extras, you know, but that opening cutscene. Wakka is a lot of things really. He's goofy and funny, extremely religious, potentially a tiny bit racist, but he's also the big brother figure to Tidus, especially in the early hours, explaining the world of Spira and different traditions that they follow. Without Wakka, it's safe to say Tidus would have never joined Yuna for the pilgrimage, so even if he's not your favourite, it's undeniable he's crucial to the story. Lulu is very much the big sister towards Yuna. She is far more calm and collected, acting her older age and showing more thoughtful thinking in crucial situations rather than jumping the gun like Tidus or even Wakka would. Whilst she may not be the most crucial piece to the puzzle that is the story of Final Fantasy X, she does enough to feel impactful and necessary, giving occasional guidance to Yuna, but also filling in Tidus on how and why other characters may feel a certain way during certain events. There is just no way I could imagine the story and cast of FF10 without Lulu being involved. She is just that more mature character you will fall in love with for her personality and charisma. Alright, fine, she's a whole one. Also, if you for some reason have a belt fetish, I mean, I don't know, I'm not judging you, but this is literally heaven for you. And finally, we have Kimahri. Initially introduced as someone who has been by Yuna's side for many years, you know he's a guardian that uses a spear to fight, and that's it, really. He's just not much of a talker, unfortunately, so if you want more details about him, you gotta wait like 10 to 15 hours. So here we are. After collecting her first Aeon, the objective is clear. Yuna is setting out on a pilgrimage alongside the Guardians with the goal of defeating Sin and bringing peace back to Spira, allowing his people to live without fear. So many people seem somewhat used to the idea of Sin just wiping out villages by this point, but it doesn't change the fact that they still have this fear of not knowing if they can wake up tomorrow next to their loved ones or if they will be swiped away and killed during their sleep. It is a serious topic that the game establishes early on. It wants you to realise Sin is the real deal, and it should be feared before you even get a chance to actually confront it. Meanwhile, whilst not officially a guardian, Tidus still comes along because he might be able to meet someone who might recognise him. After all, at this point, not much is known about the truth of where he comes from and if the version of Zanarkand people speak of here is the same one as he's familiar with. Whilst the opening minutes set up Tidus' story, the opening hours very much focus on explaining the world and its traditions, showcasing how things are done and what traditions are followed throughout Spira. As the story goes on, two more characters get added to the roster in Auron and Riku. Without going into too much detail, they both play a crucial role in the overall story, but also the development of Tidus and Yuna especially. Even though neither of them is there to start the journey, both are added early enough to allow for attachments as well as individual development. I find the story of Final Fantasy X to be very hooking compared to some other entries in the series. It does this through questions you most likely won't get answers to until much later on, such as why Auron suddenly showed up before Sin attacked Tidus. Is Tidus himself really 1000 years into the future? How will the importance of his relationship with Jecht play into the main story? That's just some of the questions you might be asking yourself, and these are all related to the same person. There is constant foreshadowing even from the earliest moments in the game, but it remains hidden in a way the chances of catching it on a first playthrough are pretty much zero. Anything I say regarding this story from now on I feel like might be a bit too much, but with this setup done, it allows us to focus a bit more specifically on the main character of the game. Or in this case, the main characters. As much as I love the crew of Final Fantasy X, I don't want to spend the entire video analysing each and every single one of them. However, Tidus and Yuna are a bit of a different case. Because despite Tidus' opening lines of "let me tell you my story," the tale of Final Fantasy X is actually more so Yuna's story, experiences and struggles just witnessed through Tidus' eyes. That's not to say he's just a narrator, because there is so much more to him. There are a lot of elements that focus purely and solely on Tidus himself. The mystery of Tidus' world compared to this one is something that stays strong throughout the entire story. Just like the constant flashback to childhood with Jecht, his relationship with Auron, and this constant hope of finding a way back to his Zanarkand. And just when you think you have the answers, there's always more. There is always another catch or another bit of story that makes what you already knew way more intriguing. Final Fantasy X is the one entry I've always connected with the most, especially when it comes to its world, and is heavily due to how we experience it through Tidus. You and him both are trying to piece the truth together. Everything is new to you, and all these names, traditions and rules are something you have to learn from scratch. He's in an unknown land, so every new word, terminology or area needs to be explained to him. There is literally a foreign language used throughout the game that he won't understand, so neither will you for a majority of the game. No, Tidus isn't the most heroic or brave character we've ever had, especially at the start. But what do you expect from this guy? He is literally just an athlete who comes to a harsh, painful reality check. His reality, his life, seems to be that of the past, a reality from 1000 years ago. So now he's just cruising along with people he met just to try and find out how accurate that statement really is. Whilst Wakka is the one to take him in, he's fully convinced that Tidus just got affected by being too close to Sin, and the toxins are the result of memory loss and funny statements being made about his past. But it's actually Yuna that's the first person to show true interest and belief in what Tidus is saying. Even though she has absolutely no reason to, she believes him. The story of Final Fantasy X simply wouldn't work if Yuna wasn't as likeable of a character as she is, considering a heavy amount of its story only keeps progressing due to her actions and decisions. Even though the competition might not be too crazy, I feel confident in saying Yuna is one of, if not the best female written character in Final Fantasy, especially when it comes to incorporating her into the main story. Actions that take place clearly have an effect on her, so her growth both as a summoner and as Yuna the person are clearly demonstrated through her will and determination to keep moving forward. As a summoner, her job is not an easy one, but she must remain with her head held high. No room to show doubt or weakness, as throughout the pilgrimage the citizens of Spira seek the summoners for courage and relief. She is their beacon for a better future. As you're seeing all of these events from Tidus' perspective, and we don't get in a monologue from Yuna herself, it's easy to forget she is just a 17-year-old trying to take on the task of saving her world. It is her life's mission to prepare and be ready for this moment, for this very task. She wants this to be a journey filled with smiles and laughter, but unfortunately it's easier said than done due to the seriousness of the situation, and how you're reminded of this reality whenever Sin is being showcased. There are definitely some moments of lighthearted comedy here or there, but when you compare this to entries like Final Fantasy 7 or 9, it's not even close. There just isn't as many opportunities for natural comedy when everywhere you look, there is some sort of sorrow and some sort of sadness taking place. The group as a whole really grows together over the duration of the story, from fellow guardians to friends and then to almost family levels of bond. Except for Yuna and Tidus, because that would be kinda weird for a romance. I have always enjoyed well-written love tales in gaming. It's a big reason why games like Final Fantasy X or even 8 are ranked so high in my books. The relationship between Tidus and Yuna is more than just a simple, hey, she's kinda hot, he's kinda cute type of thing. They build a connection that isn't one-sided. As much as Tidus teaches Yuna about a more free-minded lifestyle, she also changes him from the smirky teen to someone who truly understands the value of words. Whilst both of them might seem like fairly complete characters at the start with just a few things in common, once you finish the game and look back, only then do you realise how much was missing from both sides and how the other person manages to fill in that void. I feel very confident in saying Final Fantasy X offers the best love story of all Final Fantasies, and one of the best in gaming overall, not just JRPGs. Let's move away from the story related topics to the things you'll actually be doing, and that's playing the game itself. For both the combat and gameplay outside of it, there is a big amount to get through, but I want to tackle the combat side of things first. Whilst continuing the turn-based format which all previous 9 entries found themselves doing, Final Fantasy X is where all of that comes together by far the best in my opinion. Turn-based combat in Final Fantasy games have never felt this good. That might be a hot take for some people, especially those who have a personal attachment to the older games, but for those who are mostly accustomed to modern gaming and pacing, I believe 10 offers the best turn-based system, especially from the enjoyment side of things. Starting with the basics, you are in control of 3 characters at pretty much every battle. The left hand side will show enemy stats and elemental weaknesses if they have any, whilst on the right hand side of the screen you see the order of turns, which party member or enemy will be able to perform a move next and how long until they can go again. Unlike previous entries, when it is your turn, the enemy will not do anything. This is something I appreciate so much, just knowing that you can take as much or as little time as you want to think over the next move. Whilst some might argue the previous entries had you way more on edge with no time to waste and you had to be focused 100% of the time, I personally much prefer being able to go at my own pace and analyze the situation regarding my next move. For example, if you use an item instead of attacking, you might be able to fit in another move before the enemy has a chance to fight back. On the other hand, if you use some moves that are far more powerful, this might mean the enemy gets multiple goes before you can respond. These things also apply when using white magic spells. If you plan on using slow or haste, you get to see just how much of an impact it will have on whoever it's being applied to, allowing you to think through if it's even worth doing. It's a small but very appreciated layer of strategy. It encourages use of support spells which are crucial to many fights in Final Fantasy X. This is possibly the entry I find myself using spell buffs the most, and that is mostly because I can plan a few steps ahead. My favourite part of combat, however, has to be the ability to change party members at any time. Whilst 3 party members is the max you can use at once, the game encourages constantly changing which party members you use throughout the fight. Final Fantasy X does a great job within its opening hours, making it clear which characters are suited for what sort of enemies. For example, Wakka should always go for the flying type, whilst characters like Auron will have no chance against them. Tidus is the best against faster enemies, whilst Lulu should focus on magic powered creatures. It expects you to constantly shift who you use for different enemy types rather than pushing through with your favourite 3 characters at all time. There is literally no drawback to changing party members. It doesn't use up a turn or even slow you down, and when you consider how the leveling system works here, changing party members is actually crucial. At the end of each fight, you will earn ability points. Each character will earn these as long as they took part in the battle in any way whatsoever. That could be attacking or healing, it doesn't really matter, but they need to have done something other than just take damage. When you find yourself grinding late game, the smartest thing to do is just switch in each character at least once so they can get some AP points. This way the characters you don't find yourself using or even enjoying that much will still get a chance to level up. But it's not exactly the same leveling up you might be accustomed to, because Final Fantasy X introduced a brand new method of increasing character stats and abilities. That would be the sphere grid system. There are no levels in Final Fantasy X, no such thing as going from level 1 to 99, instead each character has a sphere grid they can fill out after gaining enough AP through battles. These spheres will provide stat boosts like attack, defense, total HP, total MP, as well as magic abilities and skills. Each character starts in their own little section that suits whichever class they might be. However, as the time goes on, you'll eventually cross over to other characters' spheres, being able to learn their abilities as well. Essentially, as the game goes on and you spend more time in combat, the party members go from being a class specialist to slowly gaining abilities in other areas. Easy example being early game, only Lulu can perform black magic, but at about a halfway point, characters like Kimahri will gain some black magic as well. The main thing that remains character specific is Yuna being the only character available to summon Aeons. After all, she is the summoner and this is her pilgrimage, so it's fitting with the story, plus it gives a strong reason to work on Yuna's build, because as she grows stronger, so do the Aeons she can summon. Whether you upgrade the sphere every opportunity you get, or if you decide to save up the points is up to you, but I always enjoyed waiting a little bit longer than suddenly giving bigger upgrades to my characters after hours of gameplay. Not sure what it is, but watching the sphere grid become more filled out and colourful has always been extremely satisfying. Knowing these characters will walk away suddenly feeling much stronger rather than just a little boost you would normally see with just one level up. Another interesting change Final Fantasy X decided to make is how equipment works. Weapons do not have any stats attached to them, but instead abilities, along with in some cases empty slots for other abilities to be added in. Some of these abilities could be things like Sensor or Strength plus 5% for example, however they can also sometimes be elemental, making the weapon's attacks magic based. Whilst this can be a huge advantage against enemies weak to that element, it can also screw you over when finding something immune to whatever you've equipped. In that case it leaves you with 2 options, either changing the weapon you have equipped or you can just switch party members instead. Final Fantasy X allows you to do both during combat. It is fully aware of where these weaknesses lie and how you can tackle them. All of this freedom and control over the situation can make it seem like Final Fantasy X would be an extremely easy game. Whilst I do agree some fights can be done within a few seconds if you have the right lineup prepared, when it comes to the boss fights, that's when the difficulty spikes really shine. No, not every boss will be a pain, however there are some clear standouts for bosses that are not only difficult but extremely long, sometimes tedious and arguably a bit unfair if it's your first time. For those who played the game, you might be aware of which bosses I'm thinking about right now, but if you haven't, just know some bosses will screw you over and you will not be ready no matter what. So my bit of advice here would be to save the game as much as possible, but also always having your limit breaks ready before a boss fight. It is just better to be safe. But what about outside of combat? What about the world of Final Fantasy X? Well, Spira is pretty incredible. And it's not even due to how it looks, but just how crucial the world itself is to the story of Final Fantasy X. We've seen this done before with other entries like Final Fantasy VII, where saving the planet is a major plot point and you really get to connect with that world. The way Final Fantasy X is structured is a bit like island hopping. Due to the pilgrimage, you go from one temple to another so that Yuna can collect Aeons and grow stronger, all the way up until the final Aeon that is supposed to help her defeat Sin. Whilst not every location is extremely memorable, often due to you moving quickly onto the next one, there are definitely some beautiful but also questionable sights. Different cultures, races, eye-catching fashion statements, and influences of religion on daily lives. We won't be getting into the hidden meanings towards religion in this video, as that could be an essay of its own, but it is important to point out the ideas of religion and how it's used here to some extent even control the population through its teachings and actions. Often seeing how seriously many people take the teachings of Yevon to the point they are terrified to even come close to denying it. What I do think is very interesting and much appreciated is how they show both sides of the story, those who follow Yevon's teachings and those who straight up think it's ridiculous how others can just blindly follow it without actually thinking for themselves. Whilst progressing the main story, you'll learn about the relationships of Yevon and the Al Bhed, and how even though they don't see clearly eye to eye, they still share the same end goal of freeing this world from sin. It doesn't matter who you are, where you come from or what you follow, sin is the reason people can't be happy on a daily basis. But going back to the pilgrimage, how exactly does that work? Do you just walk into a temple, receive an Aeon, say praise be to Yevon and leave? Well, if that was the case, honestly that would be amazing, but unfortunately, no. Because the reality of it is these temples are the worst part of the game. Each temple visited means a new Aeon for Yuna, so the idea of reaching one should be something to look forward to, something to be excited about knowing her character will be able to provide more in future battles. But have you ever considered what might be the hardest part of any pilgrimage? It's the temple trials. And there's no need to be nice about this, these are horrible. The general concept of all these trials is they're simply puzzles. You need to put the right orbs in the right place to open up the next section, but the way this is executed is so draining. They are confusing, tedious, and truth be told, what is the actual reason to ever summon or solve puzzles otherwise they can't receive the blessings from that temple? It just doesn't make sense. Even if it might seem more generic, doing something like having to prove your worth to the Aeon in battle would make far more sense from a story side of things. The summoner must prove they are worthy of controlling this creature, so how is puzzle solving meant to prove anything? Luckily, this isn't something that happens too often, and you could always use a guide if you really wanted to, but nonetheless these temples will leave you scarred when all is said and done. In between the temples, you'll interact with some side characters, often optional ones, who give you insight into the area, what's going on at the moment, as well as how other people are feeling towards you on your pilgrimage. Most of these characters might not be very memorable by face or name, but the short stories or actions they make really add to the life outside of the main cast. These individuals, the average citizen, the frontline warriors, the non-summoners, all of them have their own lives and their own choices to make. Not exactly sure why, but with Final Fantasy X, I always find myself most interested in hearing what every single person has to say. Interacting with these random people walking by, seeing if they can tell me anything interesting, or if maybe they even recognise Yuna. This of course is on top of the soundtrack that accompanies you through the journey. Whilst it might not be there as my all-time favourite, it definitely does the job of capturing Spira and your journey overall. With a mix of more uplifting tracks representing your journey, coming together as a team and growing a stronger bond, there's also the other side with tracks that will pull your heartstrings. I will always stick to my claim that Final Fantasy X has the greatest single track in the entire franchise with To Zanarkand. Honestly, even if you're not planning to play the game after this video, I highly recommend just hearing that single track on its own. It is simply a work of art. But it is more than just that one track. Emotions such as happiness, cheerfulness, sadness, fear, or even love. The game manages to cover all of these at different points of the story to represent not just our main cast of characters, but once again the world of Spira itself. But don't worry, as sad as Spira might sound at times, it's honestly not that bad. Just think about all the beautiful colours, the clear blue seas, giant elephants, and fan service everywhere you look. But there is one activity bigger than anything I just mentioned, one that brings everyone together, no matter where you're from or who you are. This is a reason to celebrate. Ladies and gentlemen, Blitzball. I hated Blitzball the first time round. Back when I first played Final Fantasy X, I thought to myself, how can something that looks so full of energy and excitement and cutscenes actually be so shit? But as I went through the game for this video, I really wanted to achieve something. I actually wanted to win and see if I could get hooked. Maybe the younger me was just missing something, and now that I've done it and I've actually achieved something, I can honestly say, Blitzball was still shit. I can see some people maybe enjoying it because there's always them few guys who happen to find the most random minigames exciting. You've got the club in Yakuza, which is incredible, fishing in Final Fantasy 15, which is the best fishing game I've ever played, casino in Dragon Quest 11, where I spent about 20 to 30 hours, you get the idea, there's something for everyone. But honestly, as much as I wanted to enjoy my time with it, and I really did try, I just couldn't ignore the fact this was by far the second worst part of gameplay, only second to the temple trials. And now comes the part of the video that is arguably the most important bit, but also the section where people will either totally agree or fully disagree. I feel like there is no real in between here. But as this is a 22-year-old game, there are clear and sometimes frustrating signs of aging. Of course that's normal and is absolutely fine, but it is crucial to point these out to anyone thinking of replaying, or especially those who might be first timers. Let's just get the big ones out of the way first, and that is the lack of freedom. When exploring the world, you'll notice two things. Firstly, the camera can't be moved, so if you can't see something properly, that's either intentional or just bluntly annoying. But nonetheless, it's frustrating at times just knowing you prefer a different view. There is one section of the world that is far more open than anything else in the game, but it doesn't really matter because of the locked camera. If anything, it can feel more restricting than previous areas because you know how huge this area is, and yet you can't actually see it. But the main lack of freedom comes in map or world design. As much as people love to forget this or act like it's not that bad, Final Fantasy X is very much just one corridor after another, similar to another Final Fantasy that people love to point out this issue with. You're basically constantly walking forward, the surrounding area might look very open and free, but when you look at the minimap, it is just one long line with a few turns here or there. Now I do want to make this very clear, I don't believe this to be an issue. I think world designs like this actually allow for the story to stay focused rather than having you wander all over the place for hours until you forget why you're actually there. I am simply pointing all of this out because from the gameplay you're seeing alone, it might seem like Final Fantasy X offers much more freedom than it actually does. Unfortunately, a lot of the beauty of Spira just isn't within reach. The same way this can be said about Final Fantasy XIII, and yes, I will always find some way to defend that game, this does actually work with the context of the story. Do you really have time to wander around wherever and however long you want? You're meant to go and collect Aeons from temples gaining strength to defeat Sin, so stay focused and stay in your lane. Switching over to the cinematic side of things, many of the cutscene choices just did not age well, mostly talking about the extreme overuse of slow motion, zoom-ins and shaking screens. The first few times is not too bad, but then there are genuine, important or emotional moments that can feel a bit ruined by a weird zoom-in or slow motion movement. At the time of its release, I'm sure this was a good, impactful design choice to really showcase the seriousness of the situation. But now, if anything, it can make these moments more funny than actually intense, which it's kinda sad. Obviously things like that can't exactly be edited or changed in the HD remasters, however something that most certainly could have and should have been changed in the re-releases is the ability to skip cutscenes. Not a single cutscene can be sped up or skipped. This would be painful for any game, but it's even worse for games that send you back to the main menu after defeat. I mentioned before how some bosses are extremely tedious or just long, but the worst part of these isn't the difficulty of the boss itself, but just the time it takes to re-attempt the battle. Some cutscenes can genuinely be between 3 to 5 minutes long, meaning you need to watch that every single time you load the game back. I'm all in for difficult games with challenging bosses. The idea of overcoming a difficult task is extremely satisfying. But when I'm aware I have to sit through a long cutscene each time just to re-attempt the fight, it can be off-putting, as well as the cutscene itself can go from being interesting or impactful to simply frustrating. And lastly, we have the iconic part of Final Fantasy X that really made it stand out even more than it already did. The first ever Final Fantasy entry with full voice acting throughout. To be completely honest, for the first ever entry to voice acting, I gotta say, it is a great job. The character voices feel extremely iconic by now, truly can't imagine anyone else playing these roles, and that's all you could really want from a main cast of characters. However, that doesn't change the fact there are moments throughout the game that are just painful to hear. And before anyone that hasn't actually played the game assumes I'm referring to that one scene everyone seems to know, no, that's not the case. In fact, that scene makes so much more sense in context when you've actually played enough of the game. I know you can't expect side characters or the NPCs to sound great based on the age, but even the main cast itself will have moments of awkward speech or just the speed at which they talk. I wouldn't necessarily blame the voice actors themselves for this, but the direction they were given on how to deliver these lines. Some characters are far better overall, like Auron or Lulu, when you compare them to someone like Wakka or Tidus. This could potentially link to the fact Auron and Lulu are supposed to be older, whereas Wakka and Tidus are trying to sound more immature and childish. Regardless, it's a shame because even though these voices are iconic, there are moments of delivery that can ruin the scene itself. So again, no, it's not horrible, and overall when looking back at it, it's not enough to throw you off. But some moments unfortunately can feel a bit ruined, or just don't manage to be as impactful as they should. If you're watching this part of the video, I'm assuming you've played the game before, or for some reason you couldn't care less about spoilers, but if you do care, then I highly advise you leave right now. The story of 10 really goes through many phases of how we feel as a player. There are genuine moments of happiness, sadness, and anger throughout, and it feels natural for the most part. The game doesn't try telling you how to feel, but instead it's how you respond to the setup of the situation. For example, going from a highly respected summoner to being considered traitors to then defying religious teachings, that is a lot of emotional and psychological drainage and damage for Yuna, who's the centerpiece of all of this. That's why experiencing all of this through Tidus is so interesting, because even though you can clearly see there's a lot on her mind, you don't actually feel like you have the power to help. All you can do is say you'll be there for her and say you'll figure something out. That is a scenario many of us may unfortunately be able to relate with. From the very beginning, the story is full of foreshadowing, with most of it not even being shoved down your throat. A scene that I just will never forget is after leaving a village, there is a bunch of kids saying see you soon and good luck and all that sort of stuff. Meanwhile, the adults are either sad or silent because they realise what the completion of the pilgrimage would mean for Yuna. Then we have the smaller things like Yuna turning around at multiple locations and just staring into the distance, only for Tidus to later figure out what she was doing is saying goodbye to all the places she would never see again. This girl is literally a teenager just saying goodbye to life. It is a sad tale with no happy ending for Yuna in sight, it would seem, but Tidus doesn't give to simply accepting her fate. Once he learns the truth, both you and him are trying to figure out a way to save Yuna so that she can continue living. And that's why it hurts so much when after finding a way to do just that and saving Yuna, we realise what that means for Tidus. The entire time, from the very beginning, it seems like Tidus is telling us his story, but after reaching Zanarkand, that shifts into the story of how we can save Yuna. We become so obsessed with the idea of saving her and convincing ourselves a happy ending is possible, that when the final moments come, they hurt as much as they do because none of this feels fair. Hearing Yuna's recording when she says individual goodbyes to all of her guardians suddenly changes how you spend the final moments together as a group. It is a bit of a longer scene, but she makes it clear how much every single person means to her, and how she's glad she got to meet Tidus and experience love before death. Only when everything is said and done, you are the one that has to go. Experiencing love before fading away is the price you have to pay instead. But it isn't sad for Tidus because he manages to show Yuna love is more than just words. It is about how far we are willing to go for someone else. He manages to teach her there is more to life than sacrifice. So keep pushing, keep moving forward even when it seems like nothing can be done. Because your life is worth living for the experiences and memories you create. A game's ending is what I always consider most crucial. As much as I care about the soundtrack, combat, storytelling and so on, if the ending is bad then that can ruin the entire image of the game for me. Final Fantasy X manages to pull off an ending that is so full of emotions and sadness, all whilst making it clear this is the way it had to be. The player understands why this had to happen, but that doesn't mean we have to be okay with it. Just like Tidus couldn't accept Yuna having to die when the final speech is happening, and we look back on the journey as a whole, we don't want to accept that Tidus is no longer here. Or is he? If it hasn't been made clear, yes, Final Fantasy X is still a brilliant game to play now, regardless if it's your first time or if you've played it before. When I completed this playthrough, all my fears about liking it less were gone. The game held up well and left me wanting more, hence why I'm still playing it after this video is done. It is a tale filled with emotions and full of growth, both for the main characters but also those around them. Tidus having to learn, adapt and understand the situation he is in allows him to analyse and figure out others but also learn about himself. There will be moments of happiness, joy, fear and sadness throughout, and just when you think you've got everything figured out, the final 10 hours or so will turn everything up, creating one of the most memorable endings in all of Final Fantasy. The turn-based combat is arguably the best out of all the entries, with a strong balance of strategy, smoothness, but also control over the pacing, providing ways to level up the entire cast for a unique upgrading system, all without necessarily putting yourself at a disadvantage as you can change and rotate party members at any point of the fight. When it comes to the gameplay outside of the combat, it definitely is not flawless, but that's to be expected when playing an older title. There are parts of gameplay that age, and some are unfortunately more noticeable than others. You most likely get frustrated by things like unskippable cutscenes, especially the ones before a difficult boss fight, or the smaller details like voice acting sounding off in certain scenes, taking you out of the immersion. There really isn't an open world to the game either. As beautiful as Spira and all of the islands you visit look, you'll mostly be walking in a straight line from one objective to another, sticking to your goal of completing the pilgrimage and acquiring different aeons. Along the way, you will meet a bunch of different faces that will show up every so often to catch up with you since the last time you met, discussing different events taking place in the world and how that might affect you. This is when you start to realise just how important and crucial the World of Spira is to the story overall. Everything you do in order to defeat sin is so that the people you meet along the way and those you leave behind may have a happier future without the fear of not being able to see tomorrow. So if you are someone looking for a strong standalone story filled with emotions, powerful world building, and a well-written female character that shows strength isn't just physical but it's the actions you stand by and commit to even when others disagree, then you will find yourself loving the story Final Fantasy X has to offer. Well, thanks for watching everyone. This was one of those videos where I wanted to talk much more, but at the same time I didn't want to make this video longer than I needed to be, so I guess this is the balance of the two feelings. If you did enjoy it, let me know in the comments and by dropping a like on the video. Those always help way more than people realize, and as I mentioned before, I was pretty scared of making this video and the idea of it flopping on YouTube does scare me a little bit, so here's hoping you guys enjoy it as much as I enjoyed making it. I mean, this is the second longest video I've ever made on the channel. As far as future videos coming up, I would love to get a video about Crisis Core done, but not sure if I'll manage to make that happen this year, as I want to enjoy the game first rather than just forcing a video. As far as 2023 goes, I am hoping to tick off some big names, for example Nier Automata, Final Fantasy 12 or 13-2, A Realm Reborn, which I'm very slowly making my way through. Let me know your opinions on Final Fantasy X in the comments as always, and if you're interested, go follow the Twitter, all the good stuff, you know, link in the description. I should probably stop talking now. Thank you so much for watching once again, and I will see you in a future video.